Nia was born during the season when the wind howled like an angry spirit through the canyons of the northern cliffs. Her cries, her mother often said, were carried off on those winds, scattered among the trees before she ever took her first breath. From the very beginning, she was not like the other children in the mountain village of Olalo. While the rest played with sticks and stones, building little huts and pretending to cook with mud, Nia would climb to the tallest rock and throw her arms wide, spinning and laughing as the gusts lifted her braids and kissed her cheeks. The elders whispered that the wind had chosen her, and in a village like Olalo, where tradition meant safety and rules were chains, being chosen by anything was a dangerous thing. She grew into a tall, wiry girl with wild eyes and a restless spirit. She moved like music, always in motion even when standing still. Her feet itched against the earth as if gravity itself were a leash. The villagers tolerated her quirks when she was small, brushing off her antics as childish nonsense. But as she ripened into womanhood, her spirited nature became a threat. In Olalo, women were not allowed to leave. They were born, married, and buried within the same rocky valley, their lives laid out like a woven mat, no twists, no frayed edges, no surprises. But Nia refused to fit into the mat. Every morning she'd fetch water from the creek, humming to herself, and every evening, once the sun dipped behind the cliffs, she'd climb to the highest ridge and dance. Not the slow, humble steps taught to village girls during wedding season, but wild, thunderous movements, twists, leaps, and spins that made the wind swirl around her like a partner. The village boys watched in awe from the shadows, but none dared join her. They called her wind-mad, spirit-touched. Her name became a whispered warning, "Be quiet or Nia will come spinning out of the trees." Her mother, Ania, watched all this with a deep, aching sorrow. She had once been just like her daughter, full of fire and fierce with dreams. But long ago, Ania had tried to leave. She'd packed a cloth sack with dried yams and goat's milk, stolen a boy's sandals, and vanished before dawn. She hadn't made it beyond the black pine grove before the elders found her. They broke her ankle with a stone and carried her back, silent and bloodied. Since then, Ania limped everywhere she went and never once looked beyond the horizon. Now she watched her daughter hurtling toward the same fate and tried, over and over, to bring her down gently before the fall came. "You don't want what's out there," she'd hiss as she scrubbed clothes in the basin. "The sky is wide, but it swallows fools. Stay grounded, girl." But Nia didn't listen. Her soul belonged to the wind. At night, when the house creaked and her mother snored softly by the fire pit, Nia would creep outside with her bundle of feathers and reeds. She'd stitch together crude wings using bamboo frames and bird bones she scavenged from the hills. They didn't make her fly, not really, but they made her feel like she could. With them strapped to her arms, she'd leap from rock to rock, twirling through the night as the moonlight danced on her skin. The wind wrapped around her like a shawl, lifting her hair and tugging at her feet, as if begging her to come away. She called herself a sky dancer in secret. It was a name pulled from the old tales, whispered by firesides but forbidden in public. Sky dancers, they said, were women who danced so wildly, so fiercely, that the spirits lifted them into the sky and made them part of the clouds. Some believed they were real. Others said they were metaphors for disobedient daughters who vanished into the mountains. Nia didn't care. She knew she was meant for more than dust and stone floors and tiny lives. But the village elders were watching. Old Mako, with his half-blind eye and cane carved with curses, began appearing near the ridge where she danced. He said nothing, only stood like a shadow among shadows. Others whispered in council meetings, murmuring that the girl was trying to summon the wind gods, that she was dangerous, that she needed correction before her spirit infected the other girls. They remembered Ania, and they remembered the shame she brought. They wouldn't allow another. Still, Nia's spirit didn't dim. It burned brighter each night, like a fire refusing to go out. And then came the harvest festival. It was the only time of year the village let itself breathe. Men painted their faces with berry juice, women wore the few bright cloths they owned, and children danced in circles around bonfires. But not Nia. She had planned something else entirely. That night, as the drums echoed across the cliffs and laughter filled the air, Nia climbed to the tallest hill above the village, her wings strapped to her arms, her body painted with spirals drawn from the sky dancer myths. She stood there, silhouetted against the stars, while the wind screamed around her like 100 voices calling her name. She began to move, not with the soft rhythm of celebration, but with the storming fury of a girl whose soul refused to be caged. Her arms cut the air. Her feet stamped the earth. The feathers trembled, the sky trembled. And below, one by one, villagers turned toward the sound, their laughter dying into silence. Up on that cliff, Nia spun faster and faster, eyes closed, heart open. The wind surged, and suddenly her toes left the ground, not entirely, not for long, but enough. Enough to steal the breath from every watching mouth. Enough for the old tales to flicker alive in the minds of those who tried to forget. She floated, just a moment, just a heartbeat, but it was enough to change everything. Because in that moment, the girl who danced with the wind had flown. The night after the harvest festival was the last night Nia would ever dance. The moment her feet brushed air and the wind answered her, the old stories stopped being stories. The elders, frozen below the cliff in horrified awe, had seen it, the moment when the impossible flickered into truth. And in Olalo, truth that threatened the order of things was always punished. They waited until morning. They let her sleep, her body curled around the ache of something wild and joyous. But when the sun rose, the shadows came for her. It was not a quiet arrest. They came with drums, not the ones used for celebration, but the bone drums, the ones that called judgment. A slow, thunderous beat that made the village gather in silence. The elders arrived in their ceremonial robes, white and red, the colors of mercy and blood. They dragged Nia from her home while her mother stood frozen at the door. Not a tear, not a word. Nia didn't stop them. She only looked down and clenched her fists until the nails drew blood. Nia screamed and kicked, but they held her fast. Old Mako recited a prayer as they carried her through the village, every word a blade. She soared where no daughter should soar. She reached where no hand should reach. To save her soul, we anchor her body. They brought her to the elders' circle, a ring of stones older than the village itself. Here, long ago, women who strayed too far were corrected. Nia knew the stories. She never thought she'd be one. They stripped her feet bare and tied her to the altar stone. The crowd stood in a tense hush. Even the children were there, their eyes wide and unblinking. The elders chanted louder now, calling upon tradition, calling upon obedience. They claimed this was not cruelty, it was salvation. Nia, squirming against the ropes, shouted back at them. Her voice was fury, her eyes two burning coals. "You're afraid," she spat, "because you saw me fly." No one answered her. No one met her gaze. Then came the blade. A thin, curved knife carried only on sacred days. It flashed once in the morning light, and then... pain. It was like lightning struck her feet, again and again. They did not cut her whole foot, no. That would have been mercy. They sliced into the tendons at her heels, an ancient method meant not to kill but to cripple. A wound deep enough to ensure she would never leap, never climb, never dance again. Her screams split the sky. Birds scattered from the trees. Mothers clutched their daughters. Men looked away. When it was done, they left her there, bound and bloodied beneath the skies she once called friend. She didn't remember how she got home. She must have been carried, because she woke in her hut hours later, her feet wrapped in rough cloth, throbbing like fire beneath her skin. The pain was so consuming she didn't notice the silence at first, the absence of birdsong, the hush of guilt that hung over the village like fog. Her mother came in at dusk, carrying a bowl of broth. She didn't say a word. She placed it on the floor, turned, and walked out. She never looked at her daughter's face. Nia lay in darkness, too weak to cry. Her feet pulsed with pain, and worse than the physical agony was the betrayal. Her village, her people, those who had watched her grow, who had laughed at her childhood tricks, had turned into monsters in a single night. And her mother, the one person who should have shielded her, had turned away. Nia didn't dance that night. She didn't move at all. But in her dreams, she flew. The wind carried her high above Olalo, past the cliffs and pine groves, past the horizon her feet would never touch again. She soared on wings made of starlight and smoke, free of pain, free of flesh. The stars whispered her name as she drifted above the world. And then, just before waking, the wind spoke to her, not a howl or a gust, but a voice, gentle and firm. They broke your body, it whispered, but not your spirit. She woke with tears on her cheeks and a strange sensation around her ankles. Her feet still throbbed, but there was something else, something cool, something soft. She blinked and looked down. Around the bandages, etched faintly on her skin, were markings. Thin, swirling shapes like feathers, not painted, not cut, but a part of her flesh. They shimmered faintly in the dim light like wind trails frozen into skin. She touched them gently, not believing. They didn't hurt. They didn't bleed. They simply existed, as if they had always been there, waiting. The blood from her wounds still stained the floor beneath her, drying into dark patterns, but the markings were clean, untouched by the violence. They circled her ankles like anklets carved from clouds. Nia's heart pounded. Was this another punishment? A curse? Or a gift? The wind slipped through the cracked window again, curling around her fingers, her neck, her face. It didn't howl this time. It purred. And for the first time since they cut her, Nia smiled. Weak and broken, but not defeated. Something was happening. Something the elders didn't expect. They thought they'd ended her story. But something deeper had just begun. The village of Olalo had always mistrusted wanderers. Outsiders meant stories, and stories meant questions, and questions, as the elders often said, were the first wind that blew down walls. But on the third morning after Nia's punishment, an old man with skin like sun-bleached bark and hair like storm clouds came walking through the pine path into the village. He wore robes that shimmered like river stones and carried no bag, only a wooden flute tied to his belt. The children said he whispered to birds. The adults called him mad. But none dared to stop him. Kobu, they said. The wind courtier. The one who listened too closely. He had come to Olalo decades ago in his youth, dancing with storms and sleeping in caves. They said he tried to chase the wind once and nearly fell off the cliffs. He left with broken ribs and a quiet smile, and was never seen again, until now. He arrived like a storm held in a man's body. He did not bow to the elders. He did not ask for welcome. He walked straight to the center of the village and stood by the fire ring until someone brought him word of what had happened. When they told him about Nia, about her flight and her fall, about the ritual and the chains of tradition, his smile faltered. For a long moment, he said nothing. Then he laughed, a sound both joyful and bitter. Still grounding your daughters to feed your fear, he said. Some trees refuse to bloom because they fear the birds will perch too high. That night, he knocked on Nia's hut softly, the way wind knocks before a storm. Nia's mother was not home. She had gone to the elders' well for prayers, leaving her daughter alone with her silence. When the knock came, Nia expected it to be another lecture, or worse, a priest. But when she opened the door with great effort and pain, it was Kobu who stood there, his eyes silver in the moonlight. You've seen the wind, he said. You danced with it. Now you must speak its language. He stepped inside without waiting. Nia, pale and wrapped in worn cloth, stared at him. The feather marks at her ankles still glimmered faintly. She said nothing. Kobu knelt beside her, pulling from his robe a tiny bundle wrapped in palm fiber. He unwrapped it slowly, reverently. Inside was a scroll, cracked with age, ink faded like whispers. He laid it before her. The legend of the skybound, he said. Nia blinked. The name pulled something inside her chest. Kobu traced the ancient glyphs. They were girls like you. Born in silence. Raised to obey. But they listened deeper. To the breaths between the leaves. the hush beneath thunder. They found the paths of wind, and followed them. But I can't walk, Nia said bitterly. Neither could they, Kobu said. The sky doesn't care about your feet. The wind does not walk, it flows. He taught her then, not how to move her legs, but how to move her breath. They sat for hours in the flickering lamplight, Kobu guiding her into silence. He taught her how to inhale without sound. How to exhale without stirring dust. How to press her palms against the earth and feel the tremble of roots. How to lie so still that the wind thought her part of the forest. Each night, he returned. They did not tell the elders. They did not tell her mother. Their lessons were buried beneath dark sky and soft breaths. Nia learned to listen, not just with ears, but with skin, with spirit. The wind, she discovered, had moods. Sometimes it growled. Sometimes it hummed. And sometimes, just sometimes, it whispered her name. Her body remained frail. Her wounds still bled if she moved too fast. But her soul sharpened like obsidian. She began to hear things others could not, the sigh of pine needles before a storm, the pause in birdsong before the moon rose. And always, always, the wind circling her hut like a lonely guardian. One night, as the firelight burned low, Kobu handed her a necklace. A thin leather string looped through a tiny hollow pendant carved from bone. It holds your freedom, he said. She turned it in her fingers. The bone was smooth and warm, as though it had lived 100 years. It was shaped like a teardrop, with a hole at its tip. Inside, a single grain of wind rested, invisible but alive. What do I do with it? She asked. Breathe, he said. But not as you've done before. Breathe into it with your whole self. With your hunger. With your sorrow. With your defiance. Let it remember you. She raised it to her lips. Her fingers trembled. She took one slow, deep breath, then exhaled into the pendant. The world responded. It did not roar. It did not shout. It stopped. The wind outside halted mid-howl. The flame in the lamp froze, its flicker paused like a caught heartbeat. Even the shadows on the wall seemed to still. Everything in the world held its breath. Nia did too. The pendant glowed faintly, just once, like a blink, and then dulled again. The silence cracked open as the wind returned, wild and swirling, racing around the hut like a creature unleashed. Papers flew. Embers danced. The flame sprang tall. Nia dropped the pendant, panting, eyes wide. Kobu only smiled. It knows you now. And the wind, brushing her cheek like a whisper, seemed to agree. It began with the birds. At first, they simply circled, wide, lazy loops over the village square. But soon, they became obsessed with one spot, the eastern hill, just above the hut where Nia lay. They wheeled in silence, hour after hour, black against the sky like ink spilled across a parchment. Even when the sun blazed hot or the clouds turned dark, they did not leave. The elders watched, muttering. Then came the wind. It blew in strange ways, never across the fields or through the rice paddies, but always through a single window, Nia's. No other shutters creaked. No other curtains fluttered. Only hers, and only when no one else stood near. At night, the sound of it brushing the walls was soft as a sigh but constant, like breath from an unseen mouth. The children were the next to notice. Whispering and wide-eyed, they began to speak of voices in the trees, melodies too strange to be birdsong, too soft to be carried by the wind alone. Some said it was a girl singing. Others swore it was the forest itself, echoing with a name they dared not say aloud. Nia, they whispered when no adults could hear. The village held its silence for days, but fear is never quiet for long. It always finds mouths to fill. Soon, the accusations began. She brings demons. She summons something with her flying dance. The birds guard her. She's cursed. They stormed her hut one morning, carrying branches and stones, old relics and prayers. They demanded she leave, that she take her spirits in strange winds and leave Olalo forever. But she cannot walk, someone pointed out. A murmur. An unease. So what, spat an elder. Let the wind carry her, since she loves it so much. They dragged Kobu into the square not long after. His bones cracked under the blows of the elder's staffs. His mouth bled, but still he laughed, quietly, as though mocking them with breath alone. You think chains can bind the sky, he whispered before they threw him from the village gate. Nia watched it all from her small window. Her hands shook as the door slammed shut again. The wind howled in anger, flinging dust into every corner of her hut. She screamed, not in fear, but in fury. And the wind answered. That night, as her tears dried on her cheeks and the world outside moved on without her, Nia lay still. She pressed the pendant to her chest. It pulsed, softly, steadily, matching the rhythm of her heart. She closed her eyes. Show me, she whispered. The wind stirred. Then she was not in her body. Not in the way she once was. Not in the broken, chained thing that lay on a straw mat, but something else, lighter, freer. She floated, not flying, not dreaming, but moving without moving. She could feel the hut around her as a memory. The cold of the dirt floor, the scratch of woven walls. But she could also feel the trees outside, tall and listening. She could taste the mountain air beyond the village walls. She could sense the cliffs, the ones where she used to dance. They called to her. Every night after that, she traveled. She drifted through memories and windsong, through whispers and dust. Her body never left the hut, but her spirit did. The pendant would grow warm before each journey. She began to understand, it was not just decoration. It held something, a piece of wind. Wind essence, alive and ancient, waiting to be shaped. She learned its language, slowly. It had no words, only sensations, pull, tremble, lift, hum. She followed it into old forests and forgotten caves. She wept when she reached the cliff where she once danced, and the wind wept with her, rushing around her as if to lift her again. Some mornings, she woke with feathers in her hair. Others, with fine dust clinging to her fingertips, though she had touched nothing in the night. But then came the storm. It had brooded over the horizon for days, a beast of black clouds and snarling thunder. The elders said it was punishment. The mothers kept their children inside. And still, through the howling, Nia's window stayed open. That night, as rain lashed the village and wind screamed through the cracks, Nia's pendant glowed. She clutched it, heart pounding. Take me, she whispered. I'm ready. The world fell away. She rose, high and weightless, above her hut, above the roofs, past the trembling trees. The rain could not touch her. The thunder was a drumbeat to her flight. She soared. The mountain cliffs rushed beneath her, etched with rivers and moss. The village, tiny now, lay shrouded in cloud. She heard the birds cry in celebration. The wind danced around her, lifting her, laughing with her. And then she woke. Panting. Drenched in sweat. Alone. But her hands were not empty. They were covered in a fine, gray dust. Cliff dust. Dust that only settled atop the highest ridges, where no villager had walked in years. She stared at her palms, breath caught in her throat. The storm still raged outside, but in her heart, there was calm. Because the wind had not lied. She had flown. Toma had always been quiet, his eyes always fixed to the ground. He was not like the other village boys who mocked Nia's dances or echoed the elders' warnings. As a child, he had once nearly died of a fever, and while others feared his sickness, it was Nia who crept to his hut each night with wild herbs and whispered stories that made him smile through the pain. So when she called him now, her voice raspy with desperation, her body too weak to rise, Toma listened. She told him of the dust on her fingers, of the flying dreams that felt more real than waking, of the pendant that hummed with something older than memory. She told him everything, and when she finally asked, "Please, take me to the Whispering Cliff," he didn't answer right away. But later that night, cloaked in shadows and silence, he came to her. He carried her gently, his arms trembling not from her weight but from fear, fear of what might happen if they were caught, fear of the wind that had grown wild these past nights, and fear of what she might become if she was right. The path to the whispering cliff was steep and narrow, cutting between trees that whispered warnings of their own. Yet the moment they stepped onto it, the wind stilled. As though it, too, was waiting. When they reached the top, the cliff pulsed with life. The air felt electric. Toma staggered as gusts pushed at him, not violently, but with purpose, almost like hands guiding him forward. He laid Nia down at the edge, his chest heaving. "I'll wait behind the stones," he murmured, unable to meet her eyes. She nodded, her hands already reaching for the pendant. The wind rose. It curled around her body, slipping between her fingers and weaving itself into her hair. It lifted her nightdress like wings in mid-flutter. Her breath shook as she raised the pendant to her lips. And blew. The sound was soft, barely audible over the wind's roar, but something shifted. The currents no longer danced around her, they obeyed her. They wrapped beneath her arms, curled at her sides, and lifted. Nia gasped. She hovered, barely an inch, maybe two, but she was not touching the ground. Her pain dissolved. Her scars disappeared beneath the rush of air. She felt like she was made of smoke and light, like her body was only a suggestion the wind could rewrite. Then came the voice. It was not like the wind's whispers, not like Kobu's teachings, not like her own thoughts echoing in solitude. It was clear. Calm. Commanding. You have been chosen not to walk, but to rise. The voice belonged to a woman, older, wiser, her tone lined with sadness and pride. Nia couldn't see her, but the voice held the weight of one who had danced the same cliff long ago. A sky dancer? Nia whispered, tears streaking her face. Yes, said the voice. One who rose when others broke. One who carried the wind and was carried in return. Nia felt something bloom in her chest, something deep, ancient. The pain she had lived with didn't vanish, but it folded itself into the wind, becoming part of her lift. I'm not afraid, she said. You never were, the voice replied. The wind surged around her, lifting her higher, only for a moment, no more than the height of a grown man, but it was enough. The sky welcomed her. The cliff recognized her. And then, gently, she sank back to the earth. Toma stumbled forward, his eyes wide. He had seen the lift. He had heard the voice. He didn't ask questions. He only knelt beside her and whispered, "What now?" She smiled, her eyes glowing like stormlight. I don't need feet anymore. They returned before dawn. Toma carried her as before, but he didn't tremble now. There was something changed in him, something reverent. Nia's hut was silent when they slipped in, the pendant still warm against her skin. She slept, not with pain, but with peace. But outside, the world had taken notice. The sun rose over the whispering cliff and revealed something impossible. Near its edge, scorched into the grass and stone, were footprints. Not ordinary footprints. They were delicate, shaped like wings instead of toes and heels. The burn marks shimmered faintly, as if kissed by lightning. And they led off the edge of the cliff, into the air. An elder found them first. He knelt slowly, trembling. He touched the ash with trembling fingers, then looked up at the sky, mouth parted in disbelief. The wind howled. And somewhere far away, a spirit laughed softly. Nia's nights became a symphony of wind and silence, of movement and stillness. After everyone in the village fell asleep, she would crawl from her mat, press the pendant to her chest, and breathe. At first, the levitations were short, mere heartbeats in the air. But the wind was patient, and she was relentless. Each night, she trained. She studied the rhythm of the breeze, the way it curled around the cliff like a serpent. She learned how to fall without fear, how to let the wind catch her. Her body still ached from time to time, but it no longer mattered. The pain reminded her of what had been taken, and what she was reclaiming. When she danced now, it was no longer for joy or rebellion. It was for power. For truth. Each dance became a ritual. The ground no longer held her. Gravity bent like a reed before her will. The pendant became more than a charm. It was a vessel. The wind entered it, swirled within it, and responded to her breath. It vibrated in her palm like a living heart. Sometimes, it glowed faintly. Other times, it pulsed with the rhythm of distant storms. She was no longer a girl trying to defy the world. She was something new. Something born from sky and pain. But while Nia soared in secret, her village withered. The rains had not come in weeks. The rivers that once sang down the mountain paths were now mute. Dust covered everything. Leaves curled and died before ripening. The fields cracked open like old wounds. Hunger crept into every home. The people murmured of curses and forgotten gods. They looked to the elders for answers, but the elders had none. Nia watched all of it. And she remembered Kobu's notes. In the hollow of her floor, hidden beneath woven mats, she had stashed pages the old wanderer had given her, pages with forgotten scripts, rituals drawn from wind-worshipping tribes long vanished. One ritual, in particular, stood out, the calling of breathstorms. It was said to summon wind strong enough to guide clouds across deserts. And where wind moved, rain followed. She brought it to the elders. They laughed. "You want us to put our faith in your sky magic?" one sneered. "Dance won't feed bellies," another spat. Her mother said nothing. She simply looked away. So Nia did what she always had, she walked her own skybound path. That night, she had Toma carry her again, though now he barely needed to. Nia could drift, hover, guide herself through short distances with bursts of wind beneath her arms. Toma walked beside her more out of devotion than duty. They reached the cliff, and she began. It was not a beautiful dance. It was raw, guttural, terrifying. The wind churned around her like a beast waking from slumber. Her pendant screamed with energy. She carved sigils into the earth with pointed sticks and blew into the charm until her lips bled. The sky above trembled. Clouds swirled in the distance, dark and full. Then it came. First, the wind. A howl across the village that slammed doors open and toppled clay jars. Then, the smell of wet earth. And finally, rain. Not a drizzle. A storm. It struck the village with a kind of furious grace, tearing through the fields, soaking the dust, filling the empty riverbeds. Children screamed in joy. Mothers wept openly. The elders huddled in silence. Some claimed it was a miracle. Others whispered that a demon had done it. By morning, everyone knew. Nia had called the storm. From the cliffs, in the dead of night, she had danced and summoned the sky's mercy. Some villagers approached her with gifts. They left fruit by her door, or tokens of thanks. Children peered into her window, hoping to glimpse the flying girl. Toma grinned with pride each time someone mentioned her name. But not all were grateful. That night, as the storm died and silence returned, Nia heard footsteps outside her hut. A shadow crept in. She reached for her pendant, but a voice stopped her. "Don't scream," it said. "I'm not here to harm you." It was Elder Moru, the same man who had overseen her punishment, who had chanted while her feet were cut. His face was taut, his eyes haunted. "You may fly now, girl," he said, stepping closer. "But the higher you go, the harder you'll fall." Nia stared at him, unmoved. "Is that a threat?" she asked, her voice like steady wind. "It's a warning," he hissed. "There are powers older than your pendant. Older than your dance. And some of us remember the last time someone tried to command the sky." He turned to leave, but paused at the threshold. "You are not a spirit," he said. "You are a child playing in storms." And then he vanished into the night. Nia held her pendant close. Outside, the wind was gentle, but she could feel something building. The trials weren't over. They were only beginning. They came for her at dawn. A dozen elders, robed in ash-stained cloth and draped in charms meant to ward off spirits. Behind them, a crowd of villagers gathered, some curious, some afraid, others eager to watch the execution of something they could not understand. Nia was meditating when the door shattered. They dragged her out like an animal, her legs limp beneath her. She didn't fight. She didn't scream. She only closed her eyes as the wind stirred around her, confused, panicked, protective. The pendant was torn from her neck. Elder Moro held it up like a severed head, proclaiming that this trinket of sorcery had bewitched their skies and cursed their minds. He threw it into a fire they'd built in the center of the village. Nia gasped as the flame swallowed it. A sharp, shrill cry cut the air, not from her lips, but from the wind itself. It whipped through the flames, scattering embers like angry stars. Still, the elders continued. They bound her arms, then brought forth her crafted wings, the delicate frame she had built from bamboo, feathers, and dreams. They smashed them with stones. Each crack of splintering bamboo echoed through the valley. Children flinched. Mothers turned their faces away. Let this be the end of her sky witching, Mora thundered. Let no girl ever again forget her place upon the ground. But the wind did not accept this judgment. It rose like a scream. What began as a whisper became a roar. The air thickened, pulsed. Dust exploded upward. Trees bent backwards. Thatched roofs tore off like paper, flying into the sky. The council tried to maintain order, but even their chants were swallowed by the storm. Nia lay on the ground, eyes wide, breath shallow. She felt her spirit collapsing under the weight of everything, her body, once again broken, her wings destroyed, her pendant gone. What was left? She closed her eyes and waited for the end. But it did not come. Instead, hands lifted her. Toma. His face was bruised, his arms bloodied, but his grip was steady. Behind him stood Luma, the baker's daughter who once watched Nia dance in secret. And Joru, the shepherd boy whose goats had often followed her to the cliffs. A handful of villagers stood between her and the chaos. They can't stop the wind, Toma said softly, holding her close. They can't stop you. Together, they carried her away, through the screaming gale, past elders shouting in vain, into the forest beyond. They found shelter in a hollow tree, wide as a hut and deep with roots. There, by the light of flickering branches, Nia's pain poured out in sobs. Her limbs trembled, her heart beat like a wounded bird. Her will flickered, almost gone. I'm done, she whispered. It's over. Toma said nothing. He only held her hand. Night fell. The wind eased. The tree creaked like an old woman whispering secrets. And then the spirit came. She didn't speak at first. She simply sat beside Nia, a glowing form shaped like a woman, but made of translucent air and drifting feathers. Her eyes were soft clouds, her touch like mist. She placed a hand on Nia's chest, where the pendant had once hung. You were never meant to stay on the ground, the spirit said. They broke my wings, Nia whispered. They broke bamboo and thread, the spirit replied. Not your wings. Nia looked up, hollow. Then where are they? The spirit leaned in close. Your wings were never on your back. They were inside your breath. A breeze entered the hollow tree then, gentle, but filled with presence. It circled Nia, lifting strands of her hair, tugging at her fingers. Close your eyes, the spirit said. Breathe like the sky. And Nia did. She drew in air, not just into her lungs, but into her soul. It filled the hollow places. It reached into her wounds. The pain dulled, then flickered, then vanished. In its place, warmth. Movement. She stood. Not on magic. Not on miracles. But on will. Her legs shook. The ground beneath her pulsed with wind, not dirt. She took one step. Then another. Then a third. The forest seemed to hum with life. Toma watched with eyes wide as moons. The other villagers held their breath. And then, Nia rose. Not like before. Not in jerks or bursts. This time, she floated slowly, steadily, as if lifted by invisible hands made of light and music. Her skin shimmered with a pale glow. The air formed patterns around her, feathers of windlight, spirals of storm mist. She hovered a few feet above the earth, radiant, calm, complete. No wings on her back, but wind in every breath. She looked toward the village, where fires now raged and elders shouted into an air that no longer obeyed them. And she knew she would return. Not to ask for acceptance, but to show them what true flight looked like. Nia's journey back to the Whispering Cliff was slow but purposeful. Word had spread like wildfire through the village, carried on hushed whispers and awestruck gasps. The same villagers who once jeered and chained her now watched with wide eyes, many falling to their knees as she passed, some from fear, others from reverence, and a few from newfound hope. Her legs, once shattered and scarred, held her upright, not with strength, but with the power of the wind that now coursed through every fiber of her being. She moved with a grace no human could claim, her body a conduit for invisible currents, shifting like mist and solidifying like stone in the faint moonlight. As Nia reached the edge of the cliff, the wind seemed to sigh in anticipation. She turned her face skyward and began to dance, not the wild, reckless movements of a girl dreaming of escape, but a slow, deliberate ritual, a weaving of body and breath, spirit and air. Each step was a note in a symphony only the wind could hear, each gesture a brushstroke painting the sky with movement. The villagers below looked up as the horizon fractured, splintering open in a riot of colors. Crimson, gold, sapphire, and emerald bled into the clouds, like a portal torn between worlds. The wind swirled violently around Nia, lifting her higher and higher, wrapping her in a spiraling dance that blurred the boundary between earth and sky. She felt the weight of centuries, the hopes of daughters who'd been told to stay rooted, the silent screams of mothers whose wings were clipped before they could soar. She felt the touch of the sky dancer spirits who had come before her, their whispers urging her onward. Higher than any girl, any woman, any spirit had ever dared to fly. As she ascended, the village below began to change. Cracks in the old walls of tradition widened. The daughters who once cowered behind locked doors found their voices, singing the songs of air taught by Nia's journey. Sons listened and learned the language of wind currents, the poetry of clouds, and the freedom of breath. Nia's mother stood at the cliffside, her face streaked with tears, tears of regret, hope, and love. Her voice broke the silence as she whispered, "Fly, my child. Fly farther than I ever dared." Nia's heart swelled. The pain, the betrayal, the scars, they were all part of her story, but they did not define her. She was no longer bound by flesh or fear. In that moment, she became legend, not a ghost haunting the valley, but a spirit guide soaring among the wind daughters, a guardian of freedom and flight. She left behind footprints no one could touch, footprints burned into the sky itself. And as the wind carried her beyond sight, a voice echoed through the mountains, soft but unyielding. They cut her feet to keep her grounded, but she left footprints in the sky.